boys and girls, children of all ages. Stay Where Network proudly brings you Cards Subject to Change with Hassel. We bring you the what ifs of professional wrestling. So, we're going to tackle one of the biggest what ifs of all time tonight. As we go, what if Vince McMahon had kept Bret the Hitman Hart instead of Shawn Michaels in 1997? So, buckle up, get in the passenger seat, and let's haul ass down the expressway of what if and tackle this right here. So, as you know, November 1997 at the Survivor Series, we got the most complicated, biggest fuck job of all time in professional wrestling. And I'm not saying there aren't others. There are others. Just this was the most high profile of all time. Being Mr. McMahon is born and screws Bret Hart. And then you get Bret screw Bret, etc., etc., etc. However, during this time, it was nothing more than Vince was coming to terms with the fact that he could not keep Bret and Shawn on the same banner. It just is what it is. He just signed Bret to a massive deal. Money-wise, it really wasn't that much. He paid Tyson more to appear at WrestleMania than Bret's whole fucking deal would have been, which is ridiculous looking back. However, it was nothing more than Vince chose Shawn over Bret. Now, with the hindsight being what it is, both men would be out eventually within the next 2 years. But he backs Shawn. Shawn gets hurt at the Royal Rumble. And less than 4 months after Bret is exited from the company, Shawn is also gone after being a diva to work with. Super difficult for everyone. Truth being told, part of it was his substance issues, and part of it was he just wanted to go be with his friends, and Vince wouldn't let him. Vince paid him to sit at the house for the next 3 years or so before he finally come back. So instead of doing this, when you only get 4 months of TV out of him anyways, Bret, who would go on to WCW and just had a huge fanfare, then a lackluster run, and by the time they started to strap the rocket to Bret, unfortunately, 2 years later, the kick happens, and we all know what the kick is, and Bret is effectively done himself in the ring. So, but what if? What if Vince had said, you know what, Shawn, I'm going to grant you your release. You want to go be with your friends so bad in WCW, you're going to go. But you're going to play ball first. You're going to put Bret over at the Survivor Series in Canada. Now, Shawn, he is known to not want to do business, so to speak. And he had famously told Bret, I wouldn't do the same for you. However, if he wants his release unconditionally, to where he can show up on Nitro the next night, he has to play ball. So, at Montreal in 1997, Shawn does do business. Him and Bret have a stellar matchup that they would have had this whole schmoz not happened. At the end, even though Shawn is playing ball, they storyline-wise give birth to Mr. McMahon as he screws over Shawn instead of Bret. Shawn goes to Nitro the next night. He debuts, quickly winning the WCW World Championship. We ain't got to explore that right now. We all know that'll be an episode unto itself at a later date and time. Let me know if that's what you want to see. Drop a comment below, and I'll get that to you. But on this night, Bret the Hitman Hart retains the WWF Championship and effectively stays with the WWF. Now, Mr. McMahon is still born. We get the Hart Foundation for a little longer. So let's explore this. What if? Where are we going to go from here? What if at the Royal Rumble, now instead of Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker in a casket match for the WWF Championship, we get Bret Hart versus The Undertaker. We all know the chemistry those two guys had. They always put on great matchups. I feel like with the use of the casket, this could have really been fun and a wild ride with these two guys right here. Of course, you're going to have the Hart Foundation doing some jumping in and out of, that just the nature of the beast. But ultimately, Kane would arrive and help Bret Hart, not because he wants Bret Hart to win, but just because he hates his fucking brother. Taker still gets set on fire in the casket. Bret retains the title. We get to move on to WrestleMania. Now, on the flip side of that night, Steve Austin, who is on a meteoric rise at this time, still wins the Royal Rumble. But now, instead of having a lackluster matchup with Shawn Michaels, who was injured at the time at WrestleMania, so I'm not going to knock him. We get Austin Hart 2 at WrestleMania 14 for the WWF Championship. This time, Austin's the face, Bret's the heel. Going into this matchup, you know we would get some great promos. These two were magic together. They had already been dancing for about a year and a half at this point, and we loved every damn minute of it. Every moment they had was just something else. Steve Austin has went on record as saying Bret Hart made Stone Cold, while Mr. McMahon might have been what put him on the map in most people's household. Bret's the reason he got that. So, going into WrestleMania, you still get Tyson in the mix, and of course Tyson's going to side with Austin. But at WrestleMania 14, Austin goes over on Bret Hart, winning the WWF Championship, and the Austin era kicks off. Now, the next night on WWF Raw, Austin's going to come down to the ring with the vaunted Wing Eagle title, holding it up over his head, declaring himself the #1 badass ass kicker in the WWF. Vince comes down to the ring with the new Big Eagle title, presents it to Austin. We still get pretty much the same of what we had right there, other than the fact that Bret Hart's there on Raw. Bret Hart does come down to the ring, and Bret Hart does tell Austin, you may have earned a little respect last night, but I'm still the man around here. However, he has the Hart Foundation in tow, and the Hart Foundation not only turns on Bret the Hitman Hart, jumping him, putting him out of action, but Owen then looks at Austin and declares himself the leader of the new Hart Foundation and telling Austin, you're next. Me and you. I beat you before. I'm going to beat you again. What if? Now, Bret will be out of action until the King of the Ring, at which point in time he would return to challenge Owen Hart, and in no less than a submission match. So Bret Hart at the King of the Ring in June returns as a face and beats Owen Hart in a submission match. Now, at this point, the Hart Foundation, it kind of disbands. They go their separate ways, with Anvil and Bulldog kind of going aside for a little while. Owen stays there and starts getting a mid-card run, doing his own thing. Now, this would set up Bret at SummerSlam to face Kane. Now, I know you're asking, why? This doesn't make sense. It will make sense. It will make sense. So, Vince is trying to get all his enemies together and pit them against one another. So, you got Bret the Hitman Hart versus Kane inside of a steel cage. And it's alluded to that the winner would get a #1 contendership match. This speaks both men's interest. I mean, Kane had just won the WWF Championship for one night against Steve Austin the month prior, with Steve Austin getting it back. But in the main event that night, you still got Steve Austin and Taker. Steve Austin still goes over on Taker, but in Bret and Kane's matchup inside of a steel cage, Kane would have his way with Bret. Let's face it. Bret always put big men over like $1 million. Great matchup. However, Bret escapes the cage, getting the win, but not winning the war, as Kane would then get outside and tombstone Bret Hart on the mat. The next night on Raw, Austin and Hart would have an unlikely alliance, coming down the aisle and together and telling Kane and The Undertaker they've had enough, challenging both men to a matchup the next month at Breakdown. What if? But what if during the course of that match, that night, Kane and The Undertaker win the tag team titles from the New Age Outlaws, making their match at Breakdown for the WWF Tag Team Championship. So in September at Breakdown pay-per-view, Hart and Austin, the most unlikeliest combo of all time, while both men are pulling that tweener face role. Austin firmly the anti-hero. Hart pulling a little more edgy bag of good guy than he had been in the past. Not the white meat baby face, so to speak. Pulling the edge there. However, the two would band together and on this night win the WWF Tag Team Championships from Kane and The Undertaker. Now, the next night on Raw, Triple H and X-Pac would challenge Hart and Austin for the tag team titles, with Vince making the match official. During the course of the matchup, though, The Rock would come down there, blast Austin upside the head with a chair, setting him up for a pedigree and the win, with Triple H and X-Pac winning the tag team championship. So their reign was very short. And if you know, in the Attitude Era, unfortunately, we got a lot of these Russo twists. So we're going to stick true to a little Russo magic, sprinkling in here and there. Now, this would lead us into the Survivor Series of 1998. At this point in time, you're going to get Austin and Rock for the WWF Championship. And on this night, The Rock would win the WWF Championship, still forming the corporation with Mr. McMahon, setting up a feud for some time to come. Now, Bret, however, since he's got to come out of that picture there, so let's elevate some of these young stars like The Rock, Triple H, Mankind. Mankind wasn't young, but you get what I'm saying. New faces. Bret's going to kind of take a step back a little bit. And Bret's going to fall into the mid-card, upper mid-card, so to speak. And Bret would challenge at the Survivor Series none other than J-E-F-F, J-A-R-R-E-T-T, ha ha ha, that's right, Double J, Jeff Jarrett, for the Intercontinental Championship. And during the course of this night, Bret would prevail, being a 3-time Intercontinental Champion, and his first Intercontinental Championship since dropping the belt to Davey Boy at Wembley. Now, over the course of the next few months, Bret would have wins over Owen Hart, Jeff Jarrett, Triple H, and even a match against Austin on a one-off Raw, firmly winning and solidifying himself moving into WrestleMania as an Intercontinental Champion of legacy. However, he has a roadblock at WrestleMania 15. So, instead of having The Undertaker and the Big Boss Man in a match that made little or no sense inside of Hell in a Cell, why not have Bret the Hitman Hart, your Intercontinental Champion, go one-on-one with the Phenom, The Undertaker, inside a Hell in a Cell for the Intercontinental Championship? What if? What if on this night, now you know they're going to put on a great show. However, at the end of the day, it's WrestleMania. The streak is intact in our universe, and it's not going to be unintact in our universe. Undertaker for the win and his one and only Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania. What if? Now, moving out of there, Bret would kind of go off the scene a little bit until about July of 1999. And yeah, that's right. My time is right, people. I'm sorry. I said 98 a while ago at Wrestle, but it's 99 at this point. I apologize. I got my notes here, people. We're trying to stick to the notes today. I fell off script last time. We're going to stick to them today. So, Bret's going to go away after WrestleMania and return again in July of 1999 to enter the title picture at SummerSlam, where he would go on to challenge for the WWF Championship Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Mankind for the WWF Championship with none other than Jesse the Body Ventura as a special guest referee. What if? What if at SummerSlam, in the main event, Bret the Hitman Hart goes over, getting the win on none other than Mankind for the WWF Championship as Jesse the Body counts to 1, 2, 3, making Bret the Hitman Hart a 6-time WWF champion. What if? What if the next night on Raw, as Bret Hart comes down to a champion's ovation, he's jumped from behind by none other than the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith? What if? Now, Bulldog, he's a little edgier by this point. He's wearing his jeans. He's got his grunge look that a lot of people had in 1999. What if? So what if on this night he comes down there, jumps Bret, setting up a match at Unforgiven the next month for the WWF Championship. Now, Bret and Davey always had good chemistry with one another, and despite Davey's issues, they just did good together. They danced well with one another. Bret was the guy that could pull a good match out of Davey. So what if on this night they have another bloody brawl a la what they had at Beware of Dog in your house? What if? What if Bret the Hitman Hart, however, goes over on Davey that night, solidifying himself as the top champion in the WWF. Now, moving into the Survivor Series, we're going to have another fatal four-way for the WWF Championship, as we have Bret the Hitman Hart versus The Rock versus Triple H versus, well, it's the Big Show. That's right, by this point, the Big Show has made his arrival in the WWF, and he's a face by this point. And if you know your wrestling history for the WWF, he wins the WWF Championship that night. And guess what? In our universe, he does it again. As Bret is outside fighting with The Rock, Big Show gets the choke slam on Triple H for the win. Now, moving into December, Bret's going to take a step back, try to elevate some talent. But unfortunately, in December of 1999, on the episode of SmackDown, Bret Hart goes one-on-one against Edge, an up-and-coming mid-carder. And by 99, Edge was starting to become somebody. He was starting to do a lot of his own, on his own thing a little bit. But, he was still Edge and Christian. But on this night right here, the unfortunate happens. Even in a what-if universe, people, injuries, they're real. Bret the Hitman Hart tears his ACL, putting him out of action until 2001. That's right, people. An injury. Spoiler, it happened. So, we're going to move into the Royal Rumble 2001. And if you're really wondering what we're doing, we're skipping past that muddled mess that was WWF 2000. Bad. So, the Royal Rumble 2001. Steve Austin, he wins the Royal Rumble much like he did in our timeline. However, towards the end of the match, around entrant number 27, some familiar music kicks off as we get a returning Shawn Michaels. That's right, Shawn Michaels jumped ship, escaping WCW just mere months before its demise. Shawn Michaels returns during the Royal Rumble and has a great showing. He is kicking ass and taking names, just to be ultimately coming down to him and Austin prevailing. What if? What if the next night on Raw, though, Shawn Michaels comes down to the ring being arrogant as ever. And at first, he's getting that hero's welcome, so to speak. And then he goes to being Shawn Michaels. Now, I will say, our 2001 Shawn Michaels is very much like our 2002 returning Shawn Michaels. He's done been to WCW. He's met his Nitro girl that helped him find sobriety and salvation. He just found her a little earlier. So we're going to get a clear-headed Shawn Michaels in 2001 that never had the back injury. Hey, people, we're winning already. Vince, you're welcome. You should have thought of this shit. So, Shawn comes down to the ring, declaring himself to be the icon, the showstopper, the main event, so to speak. Ain't nobody better than him. He is the absolute best. When at this time, we get that screeching guitar riff that we all know so well, as Bret the Hitman Hart makes his return to Monday Night Raw. The fans, the roof blows off. As Gorilla Monsoon would say, this place is banana. That's right, people. Bret the Hitman Hart has returned to Raw, coming down to the ring, looking square in the eye of Shawn Michaels for the first time since the Montreal Screwjob, when Vince screwed Shawn. What if? What if he tells Shawn Michaels, you owe me something? You may have left and escaped and went to WCW, but you still owe me something. You owe me a WrestleMania main event. You and I, one more time at WrestleMania in a 2 out of 3 falls match. What if? But, as you know, in March of 2001, a little funny thing happened as Vince McMahon bought his competition. Vince McMahon bought WCW for a mere $4.5 million. Yeah, that's right. It's speculated up to 7, but the going rate of this consensus is $4.5 million. The library's worth more than that. Can't make this shit up, people. Not even in this. It happened. But we get the beginnings of WCW in the WWF. Moving into WrestleMania 17 in a 2 out of 3 falls match, Bret the Hitman Hart would ultimately prevail 2-1 over the showstopper, Shawn Michaels, in what will be a 45-minute epic matchup that is still a Meltzer 5-star talked about to this day. Hell, he's given 6 stars to Omega, so why not make this a 6-star as well? The first 6-star of all time. Yeah. So we got it here, people. But, as you know, later in the night, Austin does something that's a little unsuspected. As Austin sides with Vince McMahon, turning on The Rock to regain the WWF Championship. What if? What if the next night on Raw, as Austin and McMahon are down there in the ring, spilling out their bile and all that shit, Bret the Hitman Hart comes out and tells Austin, you know what, Austin? You may have always been a piece of crap, but I did at least respect you, and I knew you were a tough guy that stood on your own. Till now. Standing next to that guy right there, I can't back you. I can't stomach you, and I'm going to take that title away from you. What if? But what if? Vince laughs at him and tells him, not going to happen. You'll never get a shot at this title. It's not happening, guy. And not only that, later on tonight in a handicap match, you'll go 1-on-2 versus the Dudley Boys. Later in the night, in a handicap match, they would have a 1-on-2 matchup where the Dudleys is putting them things on Bret the Hitman Hart. When oddly enough, an ally like no other that he did not expect will come running down the ring to assist him, helping Bret the Hitman Hart go over on the Dudleys, none other than Shawn Michaels. What if? What if the next week they tell Shawn and Bret, I apologize, you got a tag team championship match against the Dudleys at Backlash. What if? What if during this matchup at Backlash, it's looking as if Shawn and Bret are about to do the thing. They're about to pull it off. They'll do the unlikely. When none other than Shawn Michaels super kicks Bret Hart into a 3D through a table, turning on Bret, aligning himself with none other than Austin and Mr. McMahon. What if? So the Dudleys keep the titles and they move on about their way. But the next night on Raw, however, Vince would say that the 2-man power trip of Triple H and Austin would challenge the Dudleys for the tag team titles. What if? What if at this point during the course of that Raw, I'm tongue-tied, I apologize to you, but during the course of that Raw, Triple H and Austin, much like in our reality, win the WWF tag team titles, making them tag champions, and Austin has had some of the most unlikely of partners by this point as tag team champion. But once again, he is a tag champion of the world with a new ally in Triple H, forming the 2-man power trip, and 3 if you want to count Shawn. What if? But what if Vince laughingly tells Bret the Hitman Hart, I tell you what, you want a little something? How about at Judgment Day, if you can find somebody, if you can dig up somebody that wants a tag with your ass, I'll give you a tag team championship match against Austin and Triple H. What if at this point Bret smiles at the camera, telling him, I thought you'd never ask. And sometimes you can only depend on one person, and that's family. When out would come Owen Hart, returning to the WWF after a brief hiatus. Now, Owen would not have his unfortunate accident earlier in '99 because of the fact that Bret was there. With Bret being there to kind of talk him through Don't Do the Blue Blazer, him getting his initial run facing Bret, all of these things, he would have had a much more stellar career. Who knows, even in our universe, maybe during that 2000 era, maybe he was a WWF champion. What if? Drop a comment below. Let me know. Did you think he'd have pulled it off? However, on this night, he does return to back his brother. Because sometimes, Wyatt, you just got to back your brother's play. So, what if, when this happens, Owen and Bret win the tag team championships from Triple H and Austin? Now, this will be the same night that Triple H unfortunately tears his quad putting him out of action into the Royal Rumble the following year. But around this time, a little something starts happening. We get a little something going on called the Invasion, the Alliance, Team WCW and ECW versus Team WWF. Bret and Owen would have to go on the next night on Raw to face the Dudley Boys, part of Team ECW. Now, they would drop the titles due to the fact that Team WCW would do some shenanigans, Booker T, DDP, things of this nature. So they dropped the titles to the Dudleys. Brief run, tag titles are hot potatoes. Let's do this, people. But moving in to the Invasion pay-per-view, Vince says, all right, it's Team WWF. Austin, you're going to team with Hart. You're going to team with HBK, Kane, and The Undertaker. And you'll go against the team of Booker T, DDP, Rhino, and the Dudleys. Excuse me. At Invasion, Team WWF would ultimately lose to Team WCW when Austin turns on Team WWF, blasting Bret over the head, sending him into a bookend so Booker can get the 1, 2, 3 on the excellence of execution. What if? What if on Raw the next night, Kane, The Undertaker, and Bret, they try to attack the Alliance. They're tired of this shit. They're going at it. WCW, who the hell do you think you are? We won the war. They come down there, but their numbers just ultimately, they're not enough. They start getting their ass kicked. When all of a sudden, your Olympic hero, Kurt Angle, comes down to try to make the save. Now, he turns the tide for a short spell. But ultimately, the numbers just aren't in their favors. However, then some familiar music hits. If you smell what The Rock is cooking. The Rock. The roof blows off the place. The Rock runs down, making the save, turning the tide for Team WWF. Now at SummerSlam, as we move into there, you're going to have Bret Hart challenging for the WWF Championship against WCW leader Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, unfortunately, Bret would drop this match. Austin will pick up a much-needed win over the Hitman because as their storied rival goes, Bret was up at this point. So Austin gets a much-needed win, but he gets it when he gets a turncoat of none other than Shawn Michaels super kicking Bret the Hitman Hart into a stunner. That's right, people. Shawn Michaels is Team WCW. I mean, who would have thought it? He left to go there once. He was a champion there. He went. There you go. How about, though, over the course later in the night, though, The Rock, who just returned, would win the WCW Championship from Booker T, the five-time champion. What if? This was set up Unforgiven 2001 when Austin and Bret would have a match inside a steel cage where the Alliance could not get in. What if, in this steel cage, Bret Hart wins the WWF Championship for a historic 7-time, making Stone Cold tap out in the middle of the ring? What if? Well, what if in the main event, though, Shawn Michaels regains the WCW Championship from The Rock, effectively swapping the two titles around and transferring the power from Austin to Michaels? What if? What if, going into Survivor Series 2001, we have Team WWF, which is none other than Bret and Owen, The Rock, Kane, and The Undertaker, versus Austin, Michaels, Booker T, DDP, and The Big Show. It never made sense to me why The Big Show sided with Team WWF. Let's face it, he was WCW. They gave him his go, his boost, his power. Why didn't he and Vince's timeline do this? It made no sense to me. But in our reality, he does. But also in our reality, Team WWF still sends the Alliance and Team WCW packing as Bret the Hitman Hart gets the win over DDP. It's me. It's me. This was set up the tail end of 2001 with vengeance, where now that the alliance is done, it's time for a unification, people. It's time to unify the WWF and the WCW championships. For the first time ever, we're going to do this right here. So, at Vengeance, you got a series of 3 matches to unify these titles. In the first match, Bret would retain the WWF Championship over The Rock in what would be a stellar matchup. And you can only imagine the chemistry these two guys could have had together had we not been robbed of this throughout the years. In the second matchup, however, Stone Cold Steve Austin would prevail over Shawn Michaels, winning his first WCW championship. What if? How crazy would it have been to see Steve Austin with the WCW title, even for a few hours? What if? But what if, in the main event, Bret the Hitman Hart goes over on Stone Cold and unifies the WCW and the WWF Championship for the first time, becoming the first ever undisputed champion? What if? What if, at the Royal Rumble 2002, we still get a return that we would have got anyways, with Triple H, the Game, coming down and winning the 2002 Royal Rumble, solidifying himself in the main event against the undisputed champion at WrestleMania? What if? But what if on this night, Bret the Hitman Hart defends his unified championship against none other than, here comes the money, that's right people, dollar dollar, Shane O'Mac. Now these two could have had a great match, let's just be honest. Shane, with all his high spots and things of this nature, he could have had a really, really great match with the Hitman. So, on this night, Bret the Hitman Hart would go over on Shane O'Mac, defending his undisputed championship in what will be a solid 4.5 star matchup. What if? What if the next month, at No Way Out, Bret the Hitman Hart defends his unified championship against the American Badass, Big Evil, the Dead Man, the Undertaker? And on this night, the excellence of execution will prove this is his yard. But, as you know, at No Way Out 2002, we get a debut of the NWO. Because when you're NWO, it's for life, player. That's right, the NWO would arrive still in the WWF in 2002. Now, this was as Bret and Triple H's rivalry would heat up moving into WrestleMania. Bret would turn heel, because at this point, the people were really behind Triple H, and when during his return, they wanted to like this guy. We had hated this guy since he had arrived on the scene in the mid-90s as the Blue Blood, morphing into, even during his DX, nobody ever liked Triple H. They always hated the Game. You're gonna take a shit. It's the Rock. Nobody liked Triple H. But at this point in 2002, everyone was behind the Game. I actually still have a Triple H shirt from that 2002 Royal Rumble, as I was there that night when he won. So it's in my closet in there. I had to peep some pictures on the social media one day. But as this heats up, Bret turns heel. Triple H stays face. However, we get an alliance you would not be expecting out of Bret the Hitman Hart, as he aligns with Stephanie McMahon. As he looks at Triple H and says, this is one McMahon I can actually get behind. Literally. What if? What if the next week on Raw, Stephanie presents Bret with an beautiful undisputed championship? Now, we're going to stick with the same undisputed championship we wound up getting from the Nature Boy Ric Flair when he awarded it to Triple H a few months later. We're just going to get it a few months early. But we're going to get it heading into WrestleMania versus post-WrestleMania. So, Stephanie presents Bret with the undisputed championship, which would look beautiful around the Hitman's waist, let's just be honest. Not really, being that way, but I'm just saying, it would look great. So, that's kind of how our build to WrestleMania is with them. However, we're going to have some tweaks to our WrestleMania. We're going to have some matchups that we should have gotten during this run right here. So, initially, it was supposed to be Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Now, as you know, we got Hogan and Rock in one of the actually greatest WrestleMania moments of all time. Not maybe some matchups, but moments. They had a great match and a super sweet return to face them for Hogan. But on this night here, Austin and Hogan will go one-on-one. And Austin will go over on Hogan. Now, we'll still get the Hogan rise, and we'll get the summer of the immortality with the Hulkster. Because let's just face it, he had a great summer in 2002, and I'm not going to rob him of that, even in my what if. Not happening. You can hate Hogan all you want. He's why we watch. I mean, let's just face it, people. I don't care for his personal actions outside the ring, but we're fans today because of what he done in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. What it is, people. You don't gotta like him. I don't really like him. I respect it. But how about we're gonna have The Rock versus Scott Hall. Now, we all know Scott Hall was actually taking medication at the time to combat his sobriety issues. But Austin would literally pour alcohol on him because he didn't want to work with Hall at the time. He felt a little insulted by it. He was pouring alcohol on Hall, making Hall actually physically sick. But what if he doesn't have to work with Steve Austin? What if he doesn't have that alcohol thrown in his face? Continues to take his medicine, and we get a clear-headed Scott Hall. And we all know Scott Hall, when he was on his game, wasn't many better. He had great ring psychology. He was great in the ring, bell to bell. He just had it. He never got the belt due to substance issues. But what if, on this night, Scott Hall goes over on The Rock? What if, who knows, going into the summer, Scott Hall keeps his sobriety, leading the NWO, and possibly gaining himself a WWF championship? What if? However, Kevin Nash is going to wrestle at our WrestleMania. He has done aligned himself with the newest member of the NWO, Shawn Michaels. That's right, the clique is back, baby. Shawn Michaels and Kevin Nash will win the WWF Championship from the Hardy Boys in what ends up being a basic 10-minute match. Nash and Michaels squashing the tar out of them, doing them things. They win the WWF Championship. The NWO go 2 out of 3. And X-Pac will join the NWO still a couple nights later. However, in the main event for the Undisputed Championship, Triple H will go over on Bret the Hitman Hart in the main event of WrestleMania, winning the Undisputed Championship. Now, these two could have had great matchups had they been at the right place, the right time together. It's just the way it is, people. They could have done some things. They could have danced really well together because, I mean, it's just, both men were super talented. And I think they'd have had a great 5-star matchup going 1 hour with Triple H ultimately going over and winning the title. Now, from this point on, Bret would kind of periodically bounce in and out. Let's face it, by this point, he's a little weathered. But Bret can still pull out great matchups. He periodically show up kind of a la what The Undertaker did for his last few years. Showing up for the big events, the big four. Showing up for big programs here and there. And most notably showing up for a one-on-one encounter against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20. Now, these two would have had, no matter how long the tooth Bret was, would have had a stellar showing at WrestleMania 20. Now, we'd have got some great matchups with Bret and Eddie Guerrero. We'd have probably still got Bret and Chris Benoit. Yeah, God made me cough on that one. So, we'd got a lot of things. Drop a comment below. Let me know how you thought this would have played out. Do you agree? Do you disagree? How would you have liked to seen it gone? What are some filler in between you'd like to see? Because we do got some time gaps on this. I tried to do a large span here instead of focusing on maybe a year to a year and a half like I typically do, because I wanted to show how overall things could have possibly changed or remained the same with Bret in the mix versus Shawn. What if? This is what we tackle here each and every week on Cards Subject to Change. Because remember, The card is always subject to change.